And now we arrive at the gene key. Maybe here start at the shadow frequency and see where judgment comes from. And because the 18 is coding the IQ, so the age between 14 and 21, this is where a lot of judgment is born. And this is where we could say teenagers have a lot of possibility of having a very open mind, and they're opening their mind to the world. They're starting to go out in the world by themselves, and there are so many possibilities. So it is a mind that has the possibility to be very open and very receiving and very curious. And unfortunately, it's also age, if you think back at your teenage years, and that's often the age where people feel like, oh, the teenage year was the most difficult, where we maybe don't want to go back, because there is a lot of pointing fingers and judgment and how to be right and being in the clique or not being in the clique, being included or being excluded. So this is where we become rigid, where we think that there is just one way to fit in. And where also we kind of start to really understand we and them, and how much the world is kind of, our perception can be that the world is really made up of we and them. And here is where we have to kind of choose who are we with. And that's the low frequency. And that's where we start to kind of go in those tracks. And then it's very hard to get out of these tracks. When it comes to integrity, I will go back and say, in the body graph, this is in the splenic center. So it's not a thought process. It's not really about moral. It's much more about an intuition and instinct of what's right and how do I act on that. We spoke before about the splenic center, about it's only in the now, it's in the presence that you know that you have intuition. You don't have intuition in the future, in the past. So here it is about following that intuition in the moment and knowing what's right. And another thing would, of course, be walking your talk. And I feel here we can go in a little bit in that reparenting. So if we had a childhood that was difficult, where we maybe did not have parents that were role models for harmony, or that were even able to show us that they loved each other, or who were maybe not even loving each other, maybe we didn't have a father figure or a mother figure. So there, for many of us, there is this harmony, and the reparenting process is about becoming our own parent. And here is where we can use the line and the key of our SQ to really say, okay, what is it that my inner child needs in order to feel stability? And this would go even further in then to the star pearl and looking at the unconscious Saturn. Because when we are able to reparent ourselves, so the integrity that wasn't there because we didn't have role models with integrity, that's what we can give ourselves through the reparenting process. And then the Saturn can open for us, and we can lean into that true stability that's there and has been there all the time. We don't see it because of the kind of the bug or the error in the code that has happened from what was imprinted, and which actually just is something that we are here to help decode, which we call karma, which is collective in nature, but it's lived out both in the collective and the individual. So a reparenting process where we decide from our own intuition, our own knowing, what is it to live in integrity? What is it to live in sovereignty? What is it to live in sacred union? And that often cannot be based on what we learned as children, and even as growing up in those other two periods from 7 to 14 with the EQ, and then the 14 to 21 in the IQ. And then the highest frequency of perfection. Here is where, often speaking about the city, I love to read about it. I love the Dare to be Divine series that I believe is going to come out soon, as well as a book and a course. I go back to nature, the perfection of it, the way that it has an acceptance of natural cycles of life and death. We can think here a bit about the nomad archetype, this archetype 42, that has that knowing about night and day, about the moon, that is the new moon, and then the crescent moon, like all the cycles that are there. And they're very beyond what the human mind can perceive like perfect. And possibly to go from like a linear way of seeing things to a circular way of seeing things can take us closer to that natural inherent perfection of things.